Command just denied the strike again. ROE still stands, the pilot snapped. No fires within 3 blocks of the school. We're naked out here, ma'am. The cabin of Viking 2-1 shook as another burst of tracers stitched past the open door. The city below was a lattice of blacked-out streets and burning rooftops. Lieutenant Simderder Eva Liang's gloved fingers dug into the edge of the console, eyes locked on the infrared feed. White-hot silhouettes blurred as the helo banked. One of them, steady, braced on a rooftop, didn't move like a panicked civilian. RPG team, rooftop, grid 214667, she said. They're tracking us. Without positive ID, the pilot barked. We light them up, we own the investigation. I'm the one they hang. If we don't, you won't live long enough to get a lawyer, Ava replied. Her voice was flat, but her pulse hammered in her ears. In her headset, the Joint Ops Center cut in, clipped and cold. Viking 2-1, negative fires. Say again, negative. Maintain ROE. Extract the package and RTB. Do not escalate. The door gunner cursed under his breath. A contrail of smoke blossomed from the rooftop. Ava watched it flare, the IR plume streaking straight toward them. Ma'am? The pilot asked, raw fear bleeding through the call sign calm. I need a call, now. Ava's thumb hovered over the push to talk, caught between the order in her ear and the lives in the aircraft. She exhaled once. Break ROE, she said. My responsibility. The door gun thundered. 20 hours earlier, Fob al-Sara, 1900L, UTC+3. The first thing Ava felt was the heat. It rolled off the tarmac at Fob al-Sara in visible waves, bending the last line of sun into a rippling smear. Sand scratched at her cheeks as the rotor wash from the MH-60M slapped her uniform. She ducked under the spinning blades out of habit, one hand clamped on her cap, the other gripping the strap of a rucksack that weighed more than she did. The helicopter crouched on its gear like a loaded spring, engine whine rising. A crew chief in a dusty helmet moved past her, fingers flicking through a pre-flight check on the door gun. The smell of JP-8 and hot metal mixed with sweat and hydraulic fluid. Ava stepped onto the ramp. Ma'am! The shout cut through the noise. The pilot in the right seat twisted around, visor up, face streaked with grease and sun. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Mercer looked her over once. Small frame, Navy name tape, no visible trident, a pack that screamed staff officer more than shooter. His jaw set. Off my aircraft, he snapped, jabbing a finger toward the tarmac. Now! Ava paused with one boot on the ramp. Lieutenant Commander Liang, she said evenly. I'm scheduled to ride along. Not on my bird, you're not. Mercer flicked his hand at the crew chief. Danner, get her off. We're in hot refuel. I don't have time to taxi tourists around the pattern. The crew chief hesitated, eyes jumping between them. Behind Ava, the desert base pulsed with tired urgency, forklifts whining, distant small arms fire from the range, a loudspeaker calling some unit to some ramp. Inside the cockpit, warning lights glowed amber in the dusk. She could feel the eyes. 2 from the cockpit, 1 from the crew chief, a few more from a neighboring bird whose crew had gone momentarily still. The story was already writing itself, some staffer trying to hitch a ride. She could push back, drop rank like a weight on the table and watch Mercer's pride crack. She could remind him that ROE cards for tonight's urban operation already listed her initials next to GFC and Fire Control Authority. Instead, Ava stepped fully onto the ramp and leaned in just enough to be heard. Chief Warrant Officer Mercer, she said, I'm not a tourist. I'm here to work with your crew before we step off. You can work from the ground, he shot back. I've got fuel, time on target, weight and balance, and one shot at not killing anybody inside that city tonight. I'm not adding unknown variables. His gaze flicked pointedly to her small frame. Or extra ballast. The words were clean, no slur in them, but they still landed. For a moment, the old mission flashed behind her eyes. A different bird, a different pilot, her voice on the net recommending a route change that never came. The explosion had been a distant orange flower against a mountain, followed by 3 names read at a ramp ceremony, while she stood at attention and tasted metal in her mouth. Then, she'd had no authority. Just a recommendation that died somewhere between her and the cockpit. She set that memory aside like a weapon she refused to draw. "You're light on your manifest," she said. "My ruck's within your margin. You don't even have full shooters on board yet." Mercer's mouth thinned. "I don't care what the manifest says. Get off my chopper." There it was, the line, almost a cliché, except there was nothing amusing in his eyes. The crew chief took a step toward her, hands open. "Ma'am!" Ava's radio crackled. So did Mercer's. The same voice cut into both headsets, edged with compressed urgency. "Viking 2-1, this is Al-Sara Ops. Confirm you have Lieutenant CMDR Ava Liang on board, over." Mercer glared at her, then thumbed his transmit switch. "Ops, Viking 2-1. Negative, she's just disembarking now. We're not a shuttle service, over." There was a pause long enough to feel like judgment. "Viking 2-1? Say again last." Mercer sank a little deeper into his seat. "We're preparing for training flight. No manifest with her name, Ops." Ava didn't move. The reply came back sharper. "Viking 2-1. Be advised. Lanter CMDRGA. Liang is designated ground force, commander for tonight's hostage recovery. She holds fire control authority for your aircraft IAW Frago 09. She rides with you on all mission-related flights. That is not optional. Copy?" The crew chief's eyebrows crept up behind his visor. Someone on the neighboring pad let out a low whistle that vanished in the rotor wash. Mercer's grip tightened on the cyclic. "Copy," he said finally, each letter bitten off. "Viking 2-1 has Liang on board." He didn't look at her when he said it. The crew chief stepped back, giving her space like a door opening. Ava climbed fully into the cabin, moved to an empty seat opposite the gun mount, and clipped her harness to the floor ring with a familiar metallic snap. No one spoke for a moment. The engine noise filled the silence in thick, vibrating layers. "Ma'am?" Danner said at last, leaning close so she could hear him. "Helmet?" She nodded, slipping into the spare crew helmet he offered. The foam smelled faintly of another person's sweat and shampoo. When the comms came alive, she heard Mercer's voice again, clipped now, professional. "Al-Sara Tower, Viking 2-1, ready for lift. Viking 2-1, cleared to depart Pad 3, remain in the pattern. Confirm ROE card on board is current." Mercer sighed into the net. "ROE card current. No fires inside city limits without positive ID. No fires within 300 meters of designated no-fire locations." Viking 2-1 copies all. Ava could have left it there. Let him fly his box and treat her like dead weight. Instead, she keyed her own transmit switch on the intercom, staying off the external net. "Warrant Officer Mercer," she said calmly. "After we finish in the pattern, I'd like to run through your planned infill and exfil routes. I have some concerns about your no-fire bubbles and choke points near the school grid." Silence for 2 heartbeats. Then, with obvious reluctance, "Fine. You can brief me after we land." She watched his shoulders, the set of them under his harness. the way his hands moved on the controls. He was competent, maybe very good. He also thought she was a problem he'd been saddled with. The helicopter rose, the ground dropping away in a blur of sand and concrete. The base shrank to a cluster of lights in the encroaching dark. Ava looked out toward the city, a smudge of orange and white on the horizon. Somewhere in that glow, hostages waited in a room they might not all leave. Somewhere in the gap between orders and reality, decisions already forming would decide who lived. For now, she said nothing more. There would be time in the pattern to start pulling at the seams of his plan, quietly, precisely, until he saw what she saw. She just hoped he'd listen before the next explosion belonged to him. The Joint Ops Center hummed like a tired machine trying not to stall. Banks of monitors cast cold light over plywood walls and tired faces. A generator throbbed somewhere outside, its rhythm leaking through the canvas seams. The air smelled of dust, burnt coffee, and people who had been working too long in the same clothes. Lieutenant CMDR Ava Liang stood near the central table, helmet tucked under one arm, rucksack at her feet. The flight with Viking 2-1 had ended 20 minutes earlier. Mercer had vanished toward maintenance with a stiff, professional nod that wasn't quite an apology. Now her world was this table and the neat stack of intel slides beside it. "Look," Captain Kessler said, tapping a laser pointer against the projected map of Al-Qadir. He was young, army, with dark circles under his eyes and a patch that read S2. "Hostage location here. Grid 214-6665. We've got HUMINT from 2 separate sources, plus pattern of life off the bird for the last 48 hours. On the screen, a drone feed showed a block of low concrete buildings, alleys threading between them like veins. The cursor circled one structure, slightly taller, with a small courtyard on its roof. Ava watched the slow sweep of the FLIR image. Cars glowed white-hot on the narrow street, then cooled as they were parked and left. People moved as pale smudges. "And the school?" she asked. Kessler flicked to the next slide with visible impatience. "Here," he said, highlighting another compound a few blocks away. "Designated no fire location. Cards updated." The ROE slide followed. Bold letters stating no fires within 300 m of school grid and PID required for all engagements inside city limits. At the bottom, a line about de-escalation and collateral damage constraints, written in the precise language of lawyers and tribunals far from this tent. "We'll be operating inside that bubble on exfil," Ava said. "Your last brief said the enemy has used protected sites as cover before." "That was a different sector," Kessler replied. "Different actors, different ROE. Ma'am, I know this is your first night with us, but we've been tracking this cell for months. They're not subtle." She let the slight pass. "Play back the last 24 hours on the target block." He sighed but keyed it in. On the main screen, the timestamp rewound, then began running forward in double speed. Cars appeared and disappeared. Pedestrians flowed. A delivery truck idled too long, then left. "Freeze it there," Ava said. The image stopped. The timestamp read 0347Z. The target building sat in the middle of the frame. "What am I looking at?" Kessler asked. "The gap," Ava said. "Roll back 2 more hours." He did. The feed jumped, then restarted from 0145Z. "Now forward," she said. At 0240Z, the picture stuttered, then skipped ahead to 0305Z. "How many times has this feed dropped?" Ava asked quietly. Kessler shifted on his feet. "Look, ma'am, these birds are old. We get link and issues, bandwidth prioritization." "That wasn't a weather hiccup," Ava said. Run yesterday. He hesitated, then complied. Another acceleration of ghostly movement, another stutter near the same time, another jump. Ava felt the back of her neck tighten. Day before. Ma'am. Day before, she repeated. The pattern held. Not exact, but close enough. Short gaps, always within a narrow time window, always when the drone was centered on that same block. She leaned on the table, fingertips on the map printout. Have we flown any other missions in this corridor recently? Kessler shrugged. Nothing direct. One raid 3 weeks ago in the Northern District. Different target. That one got scrubbed on infill. She remembered the brief mention of a previous effort in the summary packet, glossed over in a single line. Scrubbed why? Technical issues, he said. Bird reported nav problems, called it. Nothing to do with this. Ma'am, we don't have time to relitigate every ISR glitch for the last month. Indulge me, Ava said. That scrubbed mission, same bird? Kessler's jaw worked. Same airframe type, different crew. Look, I'm giving you what we have. Hostages are there. We've cross-checked human, SIGINT, pattern of life. You start seeing ghosts in every dropout, we'll never launch anything. Ghosts. The word hung between them. Once, in another jock, another captain had tossed the same word at her. You're seeing ghosts, Liang. We can't base ops on your gut. The op had gone ahead. The patrol had rolled into a kill zone she'd mapped in red on her own time. Afterward, no one had gone back to that map. They'd gone back to her tone in the briefing. Too negative, undermining confidence. Maybe they're ghosts, she said now. Or maybe someone knows when your eye blinks. Kessler rubbed his eyes. We don't have more drones. We don't have more time. Hire wants a launch window tonight to show progress to our partners. That's above my pay grade. You want to press for a delay? You talk to the colonel. She almost said, I will. Instead, print me the ISR timelines and the human summaries. All of them, not the digest. He hesitated at all, then nodded. Roger. As the printer chattered in the corner, the colonel's voice came over the JOC net from an adjoining room. All mission leads, brief at 2100 L. No change to H-hour. Repeat, no change. Political window is tight, folks. There it was, clean and unambiguous. Kessler handed her a thin sheaf of paper. For what it's worth, he said, a fraction softer. We've been burned more times by overthinking than underthinking out here. Just keep it simple, ma'am. In and out. Ava flipped through the pages. On one margin, a handwritten note from some earlier analyst. ISR gap persists. Pattern? The comment had been circled once in blue ink, then crossed out in red. Overthinking. She folded the printouts neatly and slid them into a map case. Simple is good, she said, but I don't confuse simple with easy. On the main screen, the drone hovered once more over the target block, staring down at concrete and shadows. Somewhere under that grainy gray, real people waited. Somewhere in the skipped frames, other eyes might be waiting too. Ava stepped away from the table. There was a briefing to attend, a pilot who still didn't trust her, and a launch window no one intended to move. The gaps would come with them into the city, whether anyone but her acknowledged them or not. Under the floodlights, the mock compound looked almost real. HESCO barriers had been stacked into crude walls, plywood doors painted with crooked numbers. Someone had dragged old oil drums into corners to mimic cover. They still smelled faintly of fuel. Chalk outlines on the ground marked notional stairwells and courtyards. Ava stood at the edge of the street, helmet on, NVGs flipped up for the moment. The night air was cooler now, but sweat still prickled at her back under the plate carrier. "Ma'am, my guys have been on their feet since '06, the SEAL platoon chief said quietly. His name tape read, Harris. His voice carried the steadiness of someone who'd been doing this a long time. "We've run the walkthrough. Everyone knows the primary and the contingency. Running it again in full kit is asking for sprains right before we roll." Behind him, the platoon shifted their weight, rifles slung, eyes on her and on the plywood buildings. From the flight line, the distant thump of rotor blades marked Viking 2-1 cycling touch and goes. The MH-60M was a black shape against the dim horizon, practicing the short, sharp descents and climbs they'd need in the city. Ava glanced at Harris, then at the men. "Tonight is not a training raid," she said. "We're going into a neighborhood where you will be one mistake away from killing someone who doesn't deserve it, or leaving someone who does. ROE for infill is clear. No shots unless you have direct hostile intent. That means you don't get clean, obvious targets." She pointed at the mock compound. "So we practice what happens when it's not clean. Again." Harris rubbed his jaw. "And if one of my guys twists an ankle on this gravel? Then we don't find out about a weakness on the real street," she said. "We find it now, when contact means swearing and bruised pride." He didn't like it, but he didn't walk away either. That was something. Mercer approached from the direction of the landing zone, helmet under his arm, flight suit unzipped halfway to let out heat. Rotor wash still ruffled his hair. "Chief," he said to Harris, "my bird's fueled and checked. We're wheels up in a few hours. You really want to burn guys down before that?" Ava met his eyes. "We're not burning them down. We're tightening timing and contingencies. Your LZ is on the third-floor rooftop of this structure." She tapped the top of a nearby plywood building. "We're going to run the infill from touchdown to door breach twice. Then we'll run an exfil from the basement we might need to use. To your LZ under simulated contact." Mercer exhaled through his nose. Something like a laugh, but without humor. "What basement? This thing barely has walls. In the real building, Intel says the hostages are on the second floor," Ava said. "I don't trust that, so we practice as if we have to go deeper and come back out fast." Harris glanced at Mercer. "Sir, I get what she's doing. I do. But we're at the point where more rehearsal might cost more than it gives." Ava kept her voice even. "The last time I was talked out of one more run, we lost 3 people on exfil because no one had rehearsed the alternate LZ under fire. If I'm wrong tonight, you're tired and annoyed. If I'm right, we get to complain about my rehearsals later instead of sending letters home." That hung there for a beat. Mercer's gaze flicked toward the floodlit mock doorway, then to the city smudge on the far horizon. "One run," he said. "Full speed, full kit. Then my crew sleeps." "2," Ava countered. "One from primary, one from alternate." He almost argued. She saw it in the tension at the corners of his mouth. Then he turned to Harris instead. "You good for 2?" The chief rolled his shoulders. "We're good," he said. "You heard the lady. Helmets on, nodules down. Let's earn our beauty sleep." 15 minutes later, it was as close to real as they could make it. The floodlights dimmed. The world shifted into shades of green through Ava's NVGs. The street narrowed, shadows thick between stacks of Hesco. A whistle shrilled, Harris's signal, and the platoon moved. Boots crunching grit, rifles up. Viking 2-1 thundered low overhead, rotors chopping the air. The helicopter flared over the mock rooftop, skids settling for a moment, then lifting, repeating the motion to give the crew a feel for the confined space. Ava ran with the lead element, lungs settling into a familiar burn. They hit the door on time. Two men peeling to cover, one slapping a small training charge against plywood. The muffled thump of the simulator rolled across the yard, followed by a shouted, "Breach!" They flowed in. No one tripped. No one hesitated in the corners. When they hit the notional hostage room, Harris checked his watch. "On timeline," he called. "Exfil to roof, go." They reversed, moving quicker now. In less than a minute, they were on the chalked outline of the rooftop LZ, rifles outward, one man marking an imaginary tail rotor arc with his hand. "Again," Ava said. "Alternate path." Groans quickly smothered. She gathered, everyone around a dirt-smeared map tacked to a piece of plywood. With a grease pencil, she drew a line from the basement area to a different rooftop 2 buildings over. "If the main stairwell is blocked, or if we take contact here," she circled a corner, "we cut through this interior space and hit the adjacent roof. You," she pointed at Harris, "break off a team to clear this alley for the bird." Mercer shook his head. "That alley's tight. I'd be putting my tail rotor within a few feet of walls I can't see. That's a great way to leave pieces of my aircraft in country." "I know," she said. "That's why we run it now, with you talking me through what you need. So if we have to call it in real time, we already speak the same language." He studied the line for a moment longer. "Fine. But if I say I can't get in there, we don't force it." "Agreed," Ava said. The second run started worse. They hit the basement area, a darker section of the mock compound with fewer lights and more clutter, and Harris deliberately called an inject. "Main stairwell compromised. Smoke, debris, we're blocked." For a heartbeat, the platoon's flow stuttered. One man pivoted the wrong way, colliding with another. Someone's rifle snagged a loose strap. "Freeze!" Ava shouted. The line jolted to a stop. She walked the path with her NVGs down, tracing where bodies and gear had jammed up. "You've all rehearsed the clean stairwell," she said. "You haven't rehearsed the moment it fails. That's the moment that kills you." They reset, ran it again. This time, when Harris called the block, they peeled smoothly, cutting through the alternate doorway chalked on the barrier, clearing the interior room, and emerging into the narrow alley that led to the second rooftop. Overhead, Viking 2-1 made a low pass, rotors sending dust swirling. Mercer's voice came over the radio, dry but focused. "If this were real, I'd be asking for someone to mark that corner with IR, and I'd want confirmation there's no wires or antennas near my tail. You give me that, I can put a skid in here for 30 seconds. "Copy," Ava replied. "Marking corner, clear tail." They reached the final chalked LZ with seconds to spare. Harris checked his watch again, then looked at her through the green haze. "You shaved 10 seconds off the first run," he said, "and the stairwell inject didn't jam us the second time." She kept her breathing steady. "We'll be more tired in the real thing," she said. "Adrenaline cuts both ways." "Yeah," he murmured. "But at least now if we lose the main route, it won't be the first time anyone's heard you call alternate roof." Mercer walked over as the floodlights came back up, wiping dust from his sleeves. "Your alley idea works," he said grudgingly. "I still don't like it, but it works." Ava nodded. She felt the small, sharp satisfaction under her ribs and kept it off her face. "You're the one flying it. If you call it unsafe in the moment, we find another way." He studied her for a second longer than necessary. Noted. As the platoon broke to hydrate and strip gear, Harris passed by her shoulder. "You got your extra reps, ma'am," he said. "I'll admit it. Better to stumble in plywood than in concrete." She gave him a thin smile. I prefer you don't stumble at all. Working on it, he said, and moved off. Ava looked past the mock walls toward the invisible city. In a few hours, the chalk lines would be replaced by real rooftops, real doorways, real stairwells choked with dust and fear. The downbird tonight had been imaginary. The blocked stairwell a call shouted by a chief with a stopwatch. Next time, it would be the enemy providing the inject, and there wouldn't be a reset whistle. The briefing room was too bright for the hour. Strips of fluorescent light buzzed overhead, washing the plywood walls in a flat, tired glare. A projector hummed at the far end, throwing the city of Al-Qadir up in pale blues and grays. Folding chairs scraped as people settled, weapons stacked in neat racks along one side. Ava took a seat near the front, close enough to see the grid lines on the map, but far enough from the podium that she wouldn't become the automatic center of attention. Her helmet rested under her chair. Her notepad lay open on her knee, pen held loosely in her hand. Across the room, Viking 2-1's crew slipped into chairs. Mercer, his co-pilot, the crew chief Danner. Beside them, Chief Harris and his SEALs clustered together, a block of tan uniforms and quiet focus. At the head of the room, the operations colonel flipped through a stack of notes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this more times than he wanted to count. All right, listen up, he said, not raising his voice but filling the room anyway. We're going to keep this tight. We all know why we're here. He clicked a remote. The map zoomed in, highlighting a rectangle of city blocks. Target building, grid 214665, he said. Hostages here. You've seen the ISR, you've read the HUMANT. This is a short, sharp hostage recovery in a dense urban environment. No mission creep. We are in, we are out. We do not turn this into a clearance operation. Ava's pen rested on the page. She'd circled the same grid earlier, drawn her own arrows and question marks around the margins. Air, the colonel continued. You're inserting the team on rooftop LZ Bravo. Viking 2-1 is primary. Our second bird remains available as spare, but current status is yellow. Maintenance is working it. You plan as if you're on your own unless Ops tells you otherwise. Mercer's jaw tightened. Ava saw it from the corner of her eye. The slide changed again. A bold red circle appeared, around a larger block a few streets away. This is the school compound, the colonel said. This area and a 300-meter radius around it is no fire. That's on your ROE card. That's non-negotiable. No fires in that bubble from air or ground without explicit override from higher, which you're not getting tonight. The words settled on the room like extra weight. In addition, he went on, PID remains mandatory for all engagements inside city limits. You see a rifle but no hostile act? You de-escalate. You take cover, you maneuver, you don't solve it with 7.62 unless you are in imminent danger. We will not hand the enemy a propaganda victory. Harris shifted in his chair but said nothing. Mercer scribbled something on his own notepad. Altitudes, Ava guessed, or time over target. The colonel clicked again. A timeline appeared. H3 at now, H hour at 0100Z, time on target at 200L. Colored bars indicated infill, actions on the objective, exfil. Launch window is fixed, he said. Our partners are watching. Our hire is watching. We have a small political gap tonight where certain parties are looking the other way. We miss it, we may not get another. There it was, spoken plainly. The mission was not just about hostages, it was also about optics. Ava felt a familiar tension wind in her chest. Politics didn't bother her by principle. People got rescued because politicians needed victories. What bothered her was when the timeline served the camera more than the team. Intel? The colonel prompted. Kessler stood, cleared his throat, and moved through a compressed version of the brief Ava had already heard. Human sources, patterns of life, likely enemy strength. He did not mention the ISR gaps. Ava underlined a blank space on her notepad where that detail should have been. Kessler finished with a confident, "Assessment is, enemy not expecting a precise rooftop assault tonight. They've grown complacent." Complacent, she thought, or confident you'll blink when it matters. The colonel looked around the room. Questions before we move to assignments? Silence. The kind that wasn't agreement exactly, but fatigue and habit. People wanted to get through this and move to the part they actually controlled. Ava raised her hand. A few heads turned, more in surprise than welcome. "Yes, Lieutenant Commander," the colonel said. "Sir," she said, keeping her tone respectful but firm, "I request that the ISR gaps around the target block be addressed on the record. We've had repeated feed losses in the last 3 nights in that corridor at roughly the same time. That may indicate enemy awareness of our surveillance patterns or technical interference. It impacts our confidence level in pattern of life." Kessler shifted his weight. The colonel's expression didn't change much, but Ava saw the brief flicker of irritation. "Those drops have been assessed as technical," Kessler put in quickly. "No direct evidence of hostile action." "No direct evidence," Ava repeated. "But the timing is consistent. I'm not recommending we scrub. I'm recommending that the team understand that what we think we know about routine in that block is less certain than the slides suggest." A small pause. Someone's pen clicked twice and stopped. The colonel glanced at the clock on the wall. "Noted," he said. "But we don't have time to chase every maybe. The JOC assesses risk as acceptable." He looked back at her. "You still green to execute, Lieutenant Commander?" This was the moment in earlier missions where she'd said, "Yes, sir," because anything else felt like disloyalty. The moment that had haunted her afterward, when yes sounded too much like consent to the version of the story that got people killed. "I am green to execute," Ava said. "But I request my concerns regarding ISR continuity, previous scrubbed attempts in adjacent sectors, and the ROE constraints along our exfil route be entered into the mission record." The temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. The colonel held her gaze for a long, flat heartbeat. "You're asking to log a descent, Lieutenant Commander?" "I'm asking to log a more complete risk picture, sir," she replied, "so that if we need to deviate from the neat version, no one is surprised that we considered it." He exhaled, then nodded once. Short. "Fine. After the brief, you and S3 can annotate the file. For now, this is the plan we're executing." "Yes, sir," she said. He moved on. Assignments scrolled across the screen. Call signs, task org, frequencies. Ava jotted notes, her hand moving by habit while her thoughts ran along another track. Through stairwells and alleys, across rooftops, inside no fire circles that enemies could hide behind like shields. At one point, she looked up and found Mercer watching her from across the room. His expression was hard to read. Annoyance, maybe, at someone complicating his night. But there was something else there now, behind it. Not quite agreement, not yet, but curiosity. He dropped his eyes back to his notes when he caught her looking. The colonel wrapped up with the standard phrases: "Execute to the best of your ability. Trust your training. Bring everyone home." Chairs scraped again as people stood, the clatter of gear filling the space where doubts would go unspoken. Ava closed her notebook. Her concerns were noted. They would live in a few extra lines somewhere in the mission file, invisible to anyone who never went looking. But when the plan broke, and plans always broke, no one would be able to say they hadn't been warned that the map was missing pieces. And when she made the calls that would inevitably follow, she would know she hadn't nodded along in silence first. By the time Ava stepped back onto the flight line, the sky had gone from purple to black. Floodlights cast harsh cones across the rows of aircraft, turning the MH-60s into hulking shadows rimmed in white. Ground crews moved in practiced patterns. Fuel hoses, tool carts, shouted checklists drowned by the whine of auxiliary power units. Viking 2-1 sat on pad 4, rotors still, a dark, patient animal. The smell of JP-8 lay thick over everything. Ava checked her watch. -45. Ma'am? Danner jogged up, helmet clipped to his vest. You wanted load numbers before we button up? Hostages first, she said. Worst case, how many can you lift in addition to the platoon and crew? For a short hop, he said, doing mental math. If we keep fuel tight and don't try to drag half a building's worth of gear home, I can cram 10 in the back, maybe 12 if we don't care about personal space or comfort. We don't, she said. We care about not leaving anyone behind. He nodded once and peeled away to grab the manifest board. She ran a mental tally. 12 operators, 4 aircrew, unknown number of hostages, but estimate was 6 to 8. Tight, but workable, if the numbers held and nothing went sideways. Which meant, she knew, that something would go sideways. A shout from further down the line cut through the din. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander! She turned. A maintenance chief in grease-streaked coveralls waved her over toward the next pad, where another MH-60 sat with panels open and guts exposed. Viking 2-2. 2 crewmen knelt beneath the nose, surrounded by tools. Her stomach sank before he spoke. Talk to me, she said. 2-2's not making it, the chief said bluntly. Hydraulic issue we thought we had contained during pre-flight? It's worse. We're not going to clear it in time for launch, and I'm not signing off on a maybe for an over-the-city run. How long? She asked. He hesitated. Best case, 3 hours. Worst case, we start pulling deeper and lose her for a lot longer. 3 hours might as well have been 3 days. The political window would be closed. The enemy would have had time to move or kill the hostages. Behind her, she heard Mercer's boots approach. Sir, we need that second ship, he said, addressing the maintenance chief but looking at Ava. We briefed redundancy for a reason. I can't be the only ride in and out with that many variables. The chief spread his hands. I can give you a bird that might fail over the city, or a bird that sits here safe. Those are your options, Warrant. Ava looked at the open panels, the tangle of hoses and metal. She knew enough to recognize that maybe on a hydraulic system at low level over a hostile city translated into words like uncontrolled descent and hard landing. She glanced down the line at Viking 2-1. 1 helicopter, 1 route, 1 shot. Colonel needs to hear this, Mercer said. We push the op, get more assets, or we scale it down. Kessler's briefing voice echoed in her head. They've grown complacent. The colonel's words followed. We miss this window. We may not get another. Another memory layered over those. The grainy stills from a different compound. Hostages lying face down on a concrete floor. Time-stamped 12 hours after a mission that had been delayed for asset synchronization. She'd read the after-action 3 times, looking for somewhere to lay the blame that wasn't on the clock. The maintenance chief looked at her, reading the rank on her chest. Ma'am? Ava took a breath, tasting fuel and dust. 2-2 stays grounded, she said. We go single ship. Mercer turned to her sharply. With respect, ma'am, that's not the call. We briefed dual ship. If something happens to me, if something happens to you with a compromised bird, there's no second ship to save you, she said. You know that. We're not rolling the dice on hydraulics over hard rooftops. He stared at her, frustration and something like disbelief warring in his expression. Then we scrub, we push. We're about to take a lot of people into a very small box with no exit plan. We have an exit plan, she said. It's just narrower now. She turned back to Danner, who had reappeared with the manifest board. We redistribute. 12 shooters plus 4 crew plus estimated 8 hostages does not fit with full combat loads. We cut non-essential gear. Extra ammo stays. Batteries and comfort items go. If we exceed safe weight on exfil, we prioritize hostages and wounded. ROE flickered in her mind like another checklist. No kinetic fires until hostages are positively located, or unless under immediate threat. They would be going in constrained, coming out heavy, and still expected to hold their fire until the moment they had confirmation. Mercer shook his head. You're accepting a much higher risk envelope than we planned for. Yes, she said, because the alternative is waiting for a perfect envelope while people die at someone else's convenience. For a heartbeat, neither of them looked away. She could have told him about the last time she'd agreed to a delay. How the intel picture had looked better. The air package tighter. The ROE clearer. On paper. How the hostages' bodies had still been counted on the floor when they finally went in. Instead, she said, You told me earlier you didn't want unknown variables on your aircraft. Hydraulics failing over the city is a bigger unknown than me. Danner snorted softly before catching himself. Mercer exhaled hard, jaw working. Fine, he said. Single ship. But we need to be honest about what that means. If we take hits on exfil and can't lift everyone, who stays? Ava didn't flinch. Me for one, she said. Any uninjured command elements. Anyone whose presence is less critical to immediate survival than a hostage or a wounded operator. Harris had walked up in time to hear that. That's not your call alone, ma'am, he said quietly. It is tonight, she replied. I'm the ground force commander. I will not order a wounded man to stay behind while I ride out in his place. Silence stretched for a moment, filled by the rising whine of Viking 2-1's APU. Mercer looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time from another angle, less as the cautious staff officer who asked for addendums, more as someone who had already done the math and accepted where the numbers put her. ROE remains as briefed, she said, raising her voice just enough for the small circle to hear. No kinetic fires until we have positive hostage location, unless it's clear self-defense. We are not starting a gunfight just because we're scared of what might happen without one. She checked her watch again. Hachi -30. The window was narrowing in more ways than one. Get your birds ready, she told Mercer and Danner. Chief Harris, trim your loads. Everyone understands? We are leaner than planned. We are not safer. We are just faster. Harris nodded once and moved off, already calling his men by name. Mercer lingered a second longer. You're really going to leave yourself on a rooftop if it comes to it? He asked, softer. If it buys us everyone else? Ava said. Yes. He didn't argue with that. He just pulled on his helmet, the visor coming down like a curtain, and walked toward Viking 2-1. Ava followed a moment later, feeling the familiar weight of her gear and the less familiar weight of a choice that had traded one kind of risk for another. Above the flight line, the last smudge of twilight had vanished. There was no more last light, only the blaze of artificial lamps and the darker city beyond them, waiting. Night swallowed them 10 minutes after takeoff. Beyond the open cabin door of Viking 2-1, the desert dissolved into a black void, cut only by scattered clusters of light. Villages, road junctions, the distant glow of Al-Qadir swelling on the horizon. The helicopter rode a cushion of air at 200 feet AGL, rotors beating a steady, rhythmic thump that Ava felt in her chest, more than in her ears, through the helmet. She sat just behind the cockpit, harness clipped to the floor, one hand resting on the edge of the sensor console. The FLIR screen glowed in front of her, casting her face in pale monochrome. Gray fields slid past, then gave way to the jagged, hotter shapes of buildings. "Viking 2-1, passing IP," Mercer called over the net. His voice was steady, clipped. 200 AGL, 90 knots, ingressing along Route Blue as briefed. "Copy," Ava replied. "Ground force, stand, by for 1-minute call." Behind her, the SEALs sat shoulder to shoulder, bodies swaying with the aircraft. Rifles lay across knees, gloved hands resting on receivers, eyes closed or fixed on nothing. The only movement came from the slight bob of night vision tubes and the occasional adjustment of a sling. On the FLIR, the outskirts of Al-Qadir rolled into view, a thin ring of low dwellings, heat signatures bright against the cooler ground. As they drew closer, streetlights appeared in scattered clumps, then more regularly, until the city became a web of light and shadow. ROE crawled along the inside of Ava's thoughts like a text banner. PID required. No fires on vehicles without clear hostile act. No fires near school grid. "Anything?" Mercer asked over the intercom, meaning, anything that makes us turn around now. She scanned the feed. Cars drifted along the main roads, their engines hot blurs. A few scooters. Nothing in formation, nothing running with lights off yet. "Traffic pattern looks normal," she said. "Continue on Blue." They descended slightly, the tops of buildings rising to meet them. The rotor wash sent dust and litter swirling in sudden vortices as they skimmed over the first neighborhoods, the helicopter's shadow a fleeting smear under sodium lamps. Somewhere below, a dog barked frantically as they passed. Somewhere else, a faint call to prayer drifted up from a minaret, thin and reedy through the insulation of the cabin. "Viking 2-1, you're dark on lights, correct?" Ava asked, though she already knew the answer. "Affirm," Mercer said. "All external lights off. We're a rumor tonight." For 3 minutes, the rumor held. Then the first tracers climbed. Ava saw them first on the FLIR, a sudden jagged slash of heat from a rooftop, then glowing specks arcing up through the air, badly aimed. The rounds passed behind the helicopter, tearing holes in the night but nowhere near them. "Ground fire, low caliber, 1 o'clock, Mercer reported calmly. "No impact, no effect." "Maintain course," Ava said. "ROE, no fires unless they correct and track us." Another burst rose, higher this time but still wild. A second rooftop flashed farther out, as if answering. "They're just angry at the noise," Danner muttered over intercom. "Relax." But the noise wasn't the problem, Ava thought. The pattern was. Someone below was telling someone else. There's something up there. "Recommend minor dogleg left to stay off their roofline," she said. "Copy doglegging," Mercer replied without hesitation. The aircraft banked, the city tilting in her display. Her chest loosened by a fraction. The last time she'd made a recommendation like that, the pilot had held his course, citing the map and the frag order as if they were armor. On the new heading, the ground fire dropped away behind them. The FLIR view shifted to a denser part of the city. Taller buildings, narrower streets, a hotter tangle of life. "Approaching main east-west artery," Mercer said. 1 minute to turn south along Blue. Stand by, Ava murmured, more to herself than anyone else. She zoomed the sensor in on the artery. Cars moved along it in both directions, headlights bright. Pedestrians drifted near the edges, and then, emerging from the shadow of an overpass, a darker shape, a line of vehicles running without lights. "Freeze," she said sharply. Mercer held the aircraft steady. "Say again, ma'am." She keyed the internal net. "Unlit convoy on the main road, southbound, grid 2-17670. Count 4 vehicles, possible 5th trailing. Looks like pickups or technicals. No lights, speed steady, spacing deliberate." Per ROE, they were just trucks in the dark until proven otherwise. She watched them a few more seconds. No civilian traffic near them. The lead vehicle hugged the curb, the others following at disciplined intervals. "That's not random," she said. "Jock, this is Viking 2-1, Mercer called on the external net. "We have unlit convoy on our planned route south. Request guidance on whether that corridor is still recommended. Over." Static hissed for a heartbeat. When Ops answered, the voice sounded distracted, too far from the city. "Viking 2-1, Jock. Current intel does not indicate significant enemy movement. Convoy may be local security forces. Maintain route unless you have direct hostile act." Local security forces didn't drive dark through civilian traffic to be polite. "Copy your traffic," Mercer said, but his tone said he didn't like it either. "Ma'am?" Ava studied the map overlay. Their briefed route would swing them south along that main artery before turning into the block grid toward the target. Flying above an unlit convoy that might be heading toward the same district felt like volunteering to be silhouetted. "Any weapons visible?" she asked Danner, who leaned out to peer through his own NVGs. "Can't tell from here," he said. "Could be guns in the beds. Could be sacks of flour. No muzzle flashes." RO again. No fires on vehicles without clear hostile act. Staying on Blue meant speed and familiarity, but it also meant paralleling a column she didn't trust. Breaking off meant narrower corridors, more obstacles, less time to react if something went wrong. "Warrant," she said into the intercom. "Recommend we avoid the main artery and shift west, lower, over the residential quarter. Use the alley corridor to approach the LZ from the far side." "That wasn't what we briefed," Mercer replied. "No heat, just fact." "ISR around the target block is less reliable than we like," Ava said. "We have a dark convoy heading toward that sector on our planned line of advance. We don't know who they are, and we can't shoot them until it's too late if they open up. I'd rather they don't see us at all." Silence for 2 seconds. She waited for the words she'd heard before. "Stay en route, we don't deviate unless higher says so." Instead, Mercer said, "Copy, alternate ingress, turning west, dropping to 150 AGL. Watch my rotors." Viking 2-1 banked again, sharper this time. The lights of the main road slid out of frame on the flare, replaced by tighter clusters of buildings. At 150 feet, the helicopter's shadow must have been a blur over rooftop satellite dishes and laundry lines. Buildings crowded the feed now, their heat blooming white against the black sky. Narrow alleys appeared as dark cuts between them. Mercer threaded the aircraft along a path only a few dozen feet higher than the highest roofs, trusting his instruments and the glimpse of shapes through NVGs. "Clear left," Danner called, leaning into his harness. "Clear right," Ava echoed, checking the FLIR for any sudden vertical surprises, cranes, poles, anything that could reach up and swat them. The city pressed around them, a canyon of concrete and glass. Somewhere below, a window slid open. Someone leaned out, then jerked back as the rotor wash punched dust up into their face. 30 seconds to turn toward LZ, Mercer said. His voice was tighter now, but it was because of the flying, not because of her. On the screen, the target block slid into view from an oblique angle, not head-on as in the brief. The school compound's outline glowed faintly in her memory more than on the feed, its no-fire circle like an invisible minefield. Jose, Viking 2-1, Mercer transmitted. We've altered ingress per on-scene assessment. No compromise observed. Request confirmation Elza Bravo remains clear. Viking 2-1, Jauke copies, came the reply. A beat. No new threats reported near Bravo. You are cleared to continue your discretion. On the flyer, the rooftop that matched LZ Bravo's coordinates appeared. A flat rectangle with low walls, no heat signatures on the surface, access door on the north side. The streets around it were quiet, at least on the surface. Behind and to the east, the unlit convoy continued south along the main road, like a shadow heading toward the same neighborhood from another axis. LZ Bravo in sight, Ava said. Roof appears cold. No visible sentries. This angle keeps us inside the residential blocks and off the main road's line of sight. Mercer exhaled, the sound audible in her headset. Roger, coming in low. 1 pass, 1 landing. As Viking 2-1 dropped toward the rooftop, the city rose to meet them. Rooftops, satellite dishes, the distant tracer of someone firing at nothing in another district. The unlit convoy slipped out of the FLIR's edge, but not out of Ava's mind. They had won a clean ingress, but the line of trucks moving in parallel to their plan said the enemy wasn't asleep. They were simply on their way. The rooftop hit her like another world. 1 second, Ava was inside the vibrating metal cocoon of Viking 2-1. The next, she was in open air, knees flexing as her boots met concrete. Rotor wash slammed her, dragging at her gear, sending loose trash skittering across the roof. The city's heat rose up from below, a damp, baked smell of dust and exhaust. Go, go, go! Harris shouted, voice tight in her headset, but barely above a whisper on the roof itself. The team poured off the helicopter in practiced sequence, forming a loose ring around the aircraft, rifles out. Ava moved with them. NVGs snapped down, world turning green. The rooftop walls became jagged shadows. The access door loomed as a darker rectangle. 30 seconds. That was the window they'd promised Mercer. 30 seconds of vulnerability on the roof while the bird sat in a world of wires and angles. Roof clear, one of the SEALs murmured. Liang, call it, Mercer said over the intercom, even as his hands twitched on the controls. Insertion complete, she replied. Lift. The weight of Viking 2-1 vanished as the skids rose. Rotor wash roared one last time. Then the helicopter climbed away, a black shape peeling off into the sky. For a heartbeat, Ava felt exposed in the sudden relative quiet. Then the mission filled the silence. Harris, stack on the door, she whispered. Same order as rehearsed. Remember ROE, no shots unless we have clear hostile intent. Civilians first, questions always. Copy, he breathed. They flowed down into the building, boots soft on the concrete stairs, suppressors like dark rods at the end of carbines. On the second floor, a door creaked open. A man in a t-shirt and shorts squinted out, eyes widening at the sight of armed figures sliding past. One operator raised his weapon a fraction. Ava caught his sleeve, shook her head once. The man froze, hands hovering in some half gesture. She saw terror, confusion, and a flash of someone who might run to a phone or a radio the second they passed. But this wasn't the target. This wasn't why they were here. She held his gaze for half a breath, then moved on. At street level, the city wrapped around them like a tight, rough blanket. The alleys were narrower than the mock-ups, Walls close, smells sharper. A blend of trash fires, cooking oil, diesel. Dogs barked somewhere out of sight. "Time from LZ to Target?" she asked quietly. "4 minutes if we move clean," Harris replied. "More if we have to stop and kiss everybody goodnight." "Then we move clean," Ava said. "Single file, pairs bounding, comms whisper only, no white light." They slipped into the first alley, a shadow inside shadows. The sounds of the city filtered down. Distant engines, a late motorbike. Somewhere farther off, the faint pop of celebratory gunfire unconnected. To them. 2 turns in, the plan kinked. "Patrol!" hissed the point man. Ava edged up behind him, peering around the corner. Through the haze of NVGs, she saw 3 figures at the far end of the lane. Men with rifles slung, cigarettes glowing at their mouths. Local militia, by their posture and lack of uniforms. Not nervous yet, not looking this way. They were exactly where her planned route line ran on the map. "ROE?" A whisper crackled in her ear. One of the operators, anxious. "ROE unchanged," she said. "No engagement unless they show hostile intent. We're ghosts, not a raid." Ghosts. The word sat sourly with her, echoing Kessler's earlier dismissal. She scanned the alley network in her mind, overlaying the map onto the real walls. There was an alternate path. Longer, more convoluted, more turns. But it bent them away from the patrol and kept them on the clock's bad side. Another option. A courtyard she'd underlined in her planning with a small question mark. Open space, less cover. Unclear sight lines from surrounding buildings. She'd labeled it last resort, speed only. "We take the courtyard," she decided. Left at the next junction, through the open space, then hook back to the target block. Harris exhaled softly. "We don't have much structure there." "We have time," she said. "For now. I'd rather be seen crossing a courtyard once than be trapped in an alley when that patrol decides to move." The last time she'd hesitated at a junction like this, she'd chosen safety over speed. They'd taken the longer, cleaner route. By the time they'd reached the target, the hostages had been moved. They'd cleared an empty building while another team walked into the real killing ground 2 streets away. Speed wasn't always courage. Neither was cover always safety. Tonight, she wanted to be the problem arriving early instead of late. "Move," she whispered. They peeled back from the corner, fading into the opposite direction. The sound of murmured conversation and the faint flare of cigarettes stayed behind them, oblivious for now. The courtyard opened out suddenly, an irregular patch of hard-packed dirt and broken concrete. A dead tree in one corner, the hulking shape of a parked truck near a wall. Windows ringed it on 3 sides, dark rectangles behind which anyone might be watching. Every instinct screamed at her to hug the walls, slow down, slice the pie at each opening. Every second spent doing that was a second the hostages moved deeper into the city or closer to execution. "2 at a time, cross," she ordered. "No bunching. If someone leans out a window with a rifle, we break contact, not start a war." Pairs darted across, boots whispering over dirt. Shadows flickered against the walls. A dog growled somewhere behind a metal gate. A curtain twitched on the second floor and stilled again. Ava crossed in. The last pair, heart hammering. Every window a potential muzzle. Nothing moved. No shout, no shot. Just the roar of her own blood and the distant, indifferent city. They ducked into the far alley, the courtyard falling behind them. 30 seconds lost, Harris murmured, checking his watch. "Better lost here than in a firefight," she said. 2 turns later, the target block rose ahead. A thicker cluster of 3- and 4-story buildings, their roofs uneven. Ava brought up the FLIR feed piped into her wrist display, cross-checking. "Eyes up," she whispered. "We're in the neighborhood." Through her NVGs, she saw them, figures on a rooftop near the objective, silhouettes against the sky. Not just 1 or 2 bored sentries, as the slides had shown, but 4, maybe 5, spaced along the parapet. Weapons resting on the lip, not slung. Closer to street level, a narrow alley that should have been empty according to the diagram held a parked motorcycle and a man leaning against the wall, smoking, rifle barrel glinting faintly in the dark. "Copy extra rooftop presence," Harris murmured, seeing it too. "That's more than we were sold." "Yeah," Ava said softly. The word barely left her throat. The enemy wasn't asleep. They were waiting. Whether they knew for what yet, that was the only thing still in question. The extra sentries changed the air. Ava could feel it, even before a single shot was fired. The way the men on the rooftop carried their rifles. The way the smoker in the alley checked his watch like he was waiting for something. This wasn't complacency. This was readiness. Rooftop overwatch increased, she whispered into the net. 3+ on the main roof, 1 on adjacent. Street-level armed presence on the south alley. "Copy," Harris breathed. "Plan?" They were supposed to hug the eastern wall, hit the stairwell, and flow up to the second floor where the diagrams put the hostages. Clean, fast, avoid a gunfight. That second-floor room looked more and more like bait. "We stick to infill route," she said. "No shots unless someone points a weapon at us. We get inside before they decide to tighten the net." They moved. At the corner, Ava watched the smoker. He stared down the alley, oblivious to the shadows sliding closer. His rifle hung loose. His phone was in his hand. "Ease past," she whispered. "If he goes for the weapon, we put him down. If he runs, we let him." They slipped by just outside his peripheral vision, pressed to the opposite wall. One seal brushed a rubbish bag that rustled loudly in the quiet. The smoker flinched, half-turned. His eyes met the operator's NVG tubes. His hand jerked toward the rifle. "Contact," the operator hissed. The man froze halfway, instincts warring. His fingers ended up raised instead of on the grip. The rifle stayed hanging on its sling. "Hold!" Ava snapped before anyone could react. "He's unarmed right now. ROA, no kill on surrendering personnel." The man's chest heaved. He stared, then slowly slid down the wall, hands on his head, muttering something in a language Ava didn't need to understand to know it was fear and prayer. "Zip him," Harris ordered. "Muzzle on his friends, not on him." They bound his wrists and left him sitting, a scared node in the alley, then pushed on. 100 meters, 2 turns, and the target compound loomed, a slightly taller structure with a recessed doorway. "Stack," Ava whispered. The team flowed into position, 2 at the door, 2 watching the alley, 1 eye on the roofs. A small breaching charge was taped to the lock, wires neat. "Breacher set," came the murmur. "Charge set," Ava confirmed. "All elements, ears, eyes." The muted crack of the charge rolled down the alley, a blunt punch of overpressure. The door's frame splintered. They surged in on the echo. The first room was exactly what the slides promised. Mats on the floor, low cots, plastic chairs. 4 people lay prone, hands on heads, blindfolds over their eyes. "Hostages!" someone hissed. "Check," Ava snapped. "IDs now!" They swept the room, rifles trained but fingers indexed. No guns in hands, no obvious threats, just 4 small human shapes trembling. One whimpered, thin and high. Ava knelt by the nearest figure, fingers checking wrists, arms, back. The body felt wrong, too stiff, too light. She stripped the blindfold. Plastic eyes stared back at her from a training dummy's molded face. "Not real," she said, voice flat. "Dummies. This is staged." Cameras watched them from two corners, cheap black domes bolted to the ceiling. "Cameras!" Danner called from the doorway. "At least 3. Ava's stomach tightened. "Kill the feeds," she ordered. One operator raised his suppressed carbine and put 2 rounds into each dome. Plastic shattered. The little red LEDs winked out. They were already late. "Harris, clear the rest of this floor," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "If you find anyone unarmed, they go face down, flex cuffed. No executions. We're not giving whoever set this up a massacre to broadcast." Copy. Minutes meant lives. She could feel the clock as a living thing breathing down her neck. The first sweep turned up an empty kitchen, a bathroom, 2 small rooms with mattresses and clothes, signs of recent occupation, no captives. Ava moved back to the main room, scanning walls, corners, shadows. Staged hostages, obvious cameras. They wanted us to think we're done, she thought. Or they wanted us to freeze on the second floor while they moved the real ones. Her gaze caught on a patch of wall in the corner. The plaster was a slightly different color, a faint rectangle where something had been moved. There was also a hairline crack along the floor, not aligned with any visible doorway. "Here," she said. She knelt, running her gloved fingers along the crack. It traced a small square, too small for a normal door, just large enough for a hatch. She tapped it with her knuckles. It sounded different, hollow with a metallic edge. "Harris," she called softly. "I think we've got a basement." He came over, breath steady but eyes sharp. "Cellar? We didn't get that on the floor plans." "No, we didn't," she said. "But whoever staged the upstairs was counting on us being satisfied with what was on the slides." "Basements are bad news," one of the operators muttered. "One stair, one way out." Ava's chest tightened. Image, a different stairwell, different mission, smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hand. Men choking and shouting in a tunnel while a fire ate all the oxygen. The after-action report had called it constricted maneuver space. She called it a grave. "We could pull back," Harris said quietly, just to her. "Call higher, report the decoy. Exfil while we're still light and mobile. Make them retask ISR. Maybe hit another site. By the time we get that spun up," she said, "whatever's downstairs is either gone or dead." She listened. Under the distant hum of the city, the team's breathing and the faint creak of concrete, she heard it, a muffled sound below her feet. Not pipes, not machinery. A choked, rhythmic sobbing, cut off quickly as if someone had clamped a hand over a mouth. "There," she said. "Hear that?" Harris closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. He nodded once. "Breacher," Ava ordered. "Find me a hinge or latch. Quiet as you can." They pried at the edges of the hatch, finding a recessed handle disguised as part of the floor. A small, precise charge would get it open. A big one might bring the ceiling down on whoever was below. "Low yield," Ava said. "We're not collapsing anything yet." While the breacher worked, she keyed her radio. "Viking 2-1. This is ground force. Be advised, first contact room is a decoy. We have probable basement with live audio cues. We are proceeding below." Mercer's reply came back tight. "Copy, ground. We're holding in orbit. Be advised, we're getting chatter on the net that local elements are moving. Your window may shrink." "Understood," she said. She looked at the hatch, at the hastily staged room around them. at the dead cameras. They were about to trade open air and multiple exits for a single staircase into the unknown. Every survival instinct she possessed told her to keep the high ground, stay near the roof, preserve an escape route to the helicopter she'd already promised to give up if necessary. But the sound from below came again. Faint, desperate. A plea without words. "We go down," she said. "We find them before the people topside decide we're not playing the script." The breacher nodded, set the minimal charge, and stepped back. "Fire in the hole," he whispered. The muffled thump barely rattled the floor. Dust puffed from the edges of the hatch. When the smoke cleared, a narrow set of concrete steps gaped in the floor, black and tight. Air wafted up, stale, damp, carrying the unmistakable smell of too many bodies in too small a space. "Stairwell, single file," Ava ordered, forcing her feet to move. "Same ROE, anyone unarmed and surrendering lives, even if they're the ones who put them down here. We don't become the monsters their cameras wanted." She took the first step into the dark, rifle angled down, the memory of the last basement clinging to her like smoke. Below, someone sobbed again. Above, somewhere on the roof, a distant shout echoed. Enemy voices finally reacting. The trap had been sprung. She was just betting the bait they'd come for was still alive. The stairwell swallowed the team one by one. Concrete walls pressed in on either side of Ava as she moved down. Boots careful on narrow steps, slick with dust. The air grew thicker, the smell of sweat and stale breath rising. Her NVGs turned the world into a tight tunnel of green. Halfway down, she heard it clearly. A muffled cry, choked off fast. Another voice, low, angry, in a language she only half understood but fully recognized as threat. "Contact sounds below," she whispered. "Probable guards with hostages." At the bottom, the stair turned sharply. The breacher held up a fist, then pointed at a metal door, unmarked, scarred, a newer padlock gleaming against old paint. "Charge," he murmured. "Negative," Ava said. "We don't know how close they are on the other side." Manual. 2 operators moved in, one on the lock, one covering. Bolt cutters bit. The padlock gave with a dull snap. Ava nodded. "On you." The door swung inward. The room was low-ceilinged and crowded. Concrete walls, a single bare bulb caged overhead. Shadows hunched along one side. 5 people, 3 women, 2 men, pressed together, wrists bound, blindfolds crooked. 2 armed men stood near them, rifles slung, arguing. The closer guard saw the door move. His hand started toward his weapon. "Down!" Ava barked. The guard's rifle cleared the sling. 2 suppressed shots cracked. The point man's rounds caught him center mass, driving him back into the wall. The second guard froze, eyes wide, hands up. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" he stammered in accented Arabic. "On your knees!" Harris snapped. "Hands behind your head!" The man complied, dropping so fast he almost fell. Ava scanned the hostages. Alive, breathing fast, shaking. One woman's cheek was smeared with dried blood, but there were no obvious catastrophic wounds. "SEALs, clear the rest of this level," she ordered. 2 on the prisoners. Someone get these blindfolds off. Check for booby traps on their bodies. As the team fanned out, she keyed her radio. "Viking 2-1 ground. We have 5 confirmed hostages in basement level. 1 guard KIA, 1 detained. Continuing clearance. Status above?" Mercer's answer carried more background noise than before. "Ground Viking, we're hearing increased comms chatter. Multiple armed elements moving toward your block. We're also getting sporadic tracers in your vicinity. Your time is shrinking." Of course it was. The fake room upstairs, the cameras, they hadn't been for show. someone knew they were in the building. "Copy," she said. "Stand by for exfil request. ROE remains as briefed." "Affirm," Mercer replied. The frustration compressed in that single word was a mirror of her own. She moved to the hostages. One of the men flinched at her touch. She spoke calmly, short phrases. "You're safe for now. We're taking you out. You walk when I tell you. You stop when I tell you. Stay behind the men with guns." They nodded, jerky and desperate. A burst of automatic fire rattled faintly through the ceiling, muffled but unmistakable. Dust trickled from a crack overhead. "Contact on upper floors," one operator called from the stairhead. Multiple voices, movement near the main stair. So much for retracing their steps neatly up to the roof. "Report," Ava said, moving to the bottom of the stairs. The point man leaned down, face tight. "They're stacking on the stairwell from above. We go up that way, we're funneled into their guns. Maybe 2 landings of bad before we even see daylight. Basement, hostages, one narrow path that the enemy had clearly guessed. Any other exits down here?" she asked. "Negative," he said. "Just this stair, and maybe the ventilation, if you want to send them out one lung at a time." Her eyes swept the basement walls, concrete, old, cracked. In one corner, a section looked slightly different, the plaster rougher, a vertical line not quite aligned with the rest. "Here," she said, crossing to it. She slapped the wall with an open palm. It sounded dull, solid. She did it again, farther left. The pitch shifted, barely. "Possible adjoining structure," she said. "Shared wall or filled doorway. Chief, get me your breacher." The breacher hustled over, running his own hands along the seam. "Yeah," he murmured. "This isn't original. They closed something up." Another rattling burst overhead, closer. Someone shouted down the stair in harsh, clipped orders. Harris eyed the wall, then the stair. "Ma'am, if this doesn't punch through, we're wasting time we don't have." "If we go up that stair, we're doing what they expect," Ava said. "We'll bleed for every step. I'd rather open a door they didn't plan for." He looked at the hostages, clustered near the center of the room, eyes wide and white in the dim light. They were watching her, every one of them. The weight of their hope pressed like another plate on her chest. "Do it," he said. "Low-charge breaching on this section," Ava ordered. "Hostages down, heads covered. Everyone else set security on the stair. If they push down, we hold them long enough to make this hole real." While the breacher taped a shaped charge to the wall, 2 operators hauled a metal shelf over as improvised cover. Others knelt by the stair, muzzles pointed up, suppressors barely poking past the lip. Ava keyed the radio again. "Viking 2-1, ground. Be advised, main stairwell is compromised by enemy forces. We are attempting lateral break into adjacent structure. Then we'll push for alternate rooftop for exfil. I'll update with grid." "Ground, Viking," Mercer answered. "Copy lateral break. No new threats on your immediate roof yet, but we're seeing movement on neighboring blocks. I'll hold close." She pictured the helicopter above them, circling within a no-fire bubble, full of unused firepower he wasn't allowed to employ. "Charge set," the breacher whispered. "Hostages down," Ava said. "Hands over ears, mouths open, now." They complied, guided by gentle but firm hands. "Fire in the hole," came the quiet call. The blast punched the room, louder in the confined space than the small charge deserved. Dust billowed. When it cleared enough to see, a jagged hole gaped in the wall, shoulder wide, leading into darkness. "Go," Ava said. They pushed through one by one, Operators first, then hostages guided between them. The adjacent space was another basement, this one unfinished, with bare concrete and exposed pipes. A narrow stair led up, offset from the one they'd come down. Ava listened. Nothing above. No shouting, no boots yet. "This stair is clear for now," the point man reported. "We might beat them to the roof." "Might," she echoed. They moved. Up the new stair, faster now, hostages shepherded between armored bodies. At the first landing, a door led into a ground-floor shop. Dark, shelves shadowed. They bypassed it, continuing up. On the top level, a final door yielded to a quick pry. Cool night air rushed in, laden with dust and cordite. They spilled onto the roof of the adjacent building. From here, Ava could see the original target roof one structure over, shapes moving where their planned LZ had been. Sentries were alert now, rifles scanning. "We won't make it back to Bravo," Harris said. "No," she agreed. "We won't." She keyed the radio. "Viking 2-1, ground, new rooftop exfil, marking position now." She popped an IR strobe from her pouch, snapped it on, and shaded it with her hand until she was sure it wouldn't be visible to the naked eye from neighboring roofs. Then she lifted it just enough toward the sky. "Grid 214-6-67, she transmitted. "One building west of original Elza Bravo. Call it Bravo 1. Multiple packs, including hostages. We are taking sporadic fire from surrounding blocks. Request immediate pickup." Mercer's reply came fast. "Ground, Viking. Bravo 1 acknowledged. I see your sparkle. I'm coming to you." As if on cue, a crack sounded past her ear, a round snapping through the air. Another followed, clanging off the parapet. "Contact! Neighboring roof!" someone shouted. The clock had followed them up from the basement. It was still ticking. Rounds snapped overhead, white streaks through Ava's NVGs. Concrete spat chips from the rooftop parapet. "Suppressing fire, east roof!" someone yelled, already dropping to a knee and sending controlled bursts toward the muzzle flashes. The hostages curled tight in the center of the rooftop, hands over their heads, eyes wild behind hastily removed blindfolds. Operators formed a loose ring around them, firing from behind low walls and an old water tank. Ava pressed her back against the parapet and keyed her radio. "Viking 2-1, Bravo 1 is taking contact from neighboring structures. Multiple shooters, at least one elevated. We need pickup now." Mercer's voice came back over the din, strained but clear. "Ground, Viking. I have you, making my run. Be advised. We're inside the school no fire bubble. Hire just reminded me. No direct fires?" Of course they had. She glanced across the street. 2 rooftops over, a taller building offered a clean line of sight to her position. Muzzle flashes winked from behind a low wall. The pattern of fire was probing more than punishing, for now. They were testing ranges, watching them. "Hostages down, tighter," she ordered. "Bodies between them and the guns, not gear. We keep them alive or none of this is worth it." The thump, thump, thump of approaching rotors rose, louder than it should have in the cramped rooftop canyon. Viking 2-1's shadow swept across the block a heartbeat before the aircraft itself appeared, a dark mass dropping into view just above their heads. "Viking 2-1 on final for Bravo 1, Mercer called. "One pass, 30 seconds on deck. Make them count." The helicopter flared in, skids searching for the narrow flat space between antennas and low walls. Rotor wash slammed down, dragging dust and papers into a swirling storm. "Move!" Harris shouted. "Hostages first!" 2 operators broke from cover, grabbing the nearest hostages and hustling them toward the open cabin. Danner leaned out, one hand on the frame, the other grabbing wrists and hauling bodies inside. Gunfire intensified. Rounds sparked off the helicopter's fuselage, ringing metallic notes that cut through the roaring air. "Taking rounds from north and east," Danner yelled. "Armor's holding, but I'd like to not test it." Ava hustled the last hostage toward the ramp, counting automatically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then SEALs behind them, moving in practiced sequence. Every second on the roof stretched long, elastic, threatening to snap. Her headset crackled. A new voice, Joint Ops Center, clipped and distant. "Viking 2-1, Al-Sara Ops. Reminder, you are inside no fire zone around school grid. ROE still in effect. Negative fires. Say again, negative fires in your current position." Mercer ground out a reply. "Ops, Viking. We are taking effective fire. Hostages and friendlies exposed. Request ROE clarification for immediate suppression on identified threat rooftops. Over." "Negative, Viking," Ops responded. "Maintain ROE. Extract package and RTB. Do not escalate." "Do not escalate." From where Ava crouched, pressed against the helicopter's side, the situation felt less like escalation and more like gravity. "Last man!" Harris shouted, clambering up the skid and into the cabin. "We're loaded." "Ground. All aboard?" Mercer demanded. A round cracked into the rooftop inches from Ava's boot. She swung into the cabin, boots hitting metal, hand snapping to the nearest tie-down. "Ground is aboard!" she yelled. "Lift!" Viking 2-1 clawed upward, rotors biting hard. The roof fell away. The city expanded beneath them in a jagged maze of flat tops and alleys. Gunfire followed them, tracing lines in the air. "Taking heavier fire from 3 o'clock, Danner reported, pivoting his M134 toward the threat. "Permission to engage?" "Negative," Mercer began. "We're still—" Ava saw it on the FLIR monitor by her knee before anyone else. A figure braced on a rooftop ahead and slightly below their new flight path, something long and tubular on his shoulder. Another man beside him held a radio. They weren't spraying wildly like the others. They were waiting for the right angle. "RPG team, rooftop, grid 214-667, she snapped. "They're tracking us." The figure adjusted, settling into a firing stance. Ava could practically feel his calm through the grainy image. "Without positive ID?" Mercer barked. "I start shooting down there and I own the inquiry. We're in the bubble, ma'am. That's a school grid." "If we don't, you won't live long enough to get a lawyer," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand tightened on the console. Ops chimed in again, oblivious to the exact geometry of death on her screen. "Viking, maintain ROE. No direct fires. Repeat, no." On the monitor, a little plume of IR flared at the tube's rear. The RPG left its launcher, a bright comet arcing straight toward the helicopter's flight path. Time contracted. "Ma'am," Mercer said, fear punching through his call sign calm. "I need a call. Now." Ava's thumb hovered over the transmit switch. She could hear the ROE lines in her head, lawyers' words laid over this very neighborhood. She could also see the faces in the cabin around her. The hostages, eyes squeezed shut. Harris, jaw clenched. Danner, tracking the threat with his gun, but waiting for the word he wasn't allowed to say. She thought of a different flight, a different night, when she'd stayed inside the lines and watched a friendly convoy disappear in a blooming fireball because someone else had decided their survival wasn't worth bending ink on a page. Not again. She keyed the intercom first. "Danner, you have guns free on that RPG rooftop if I say so. Hold for my word." "Copy, holding," he said, voice tight. Then she hit the main net. "Al-Sara Ops, This is Lieutenant CMDR Ava Liang, Ground Force Commander on Viking 2-1, she said, words sharp, deliberate. I am assuming responsibility for engagement. Break ROE. She didn't wait for the response. Danner, she ordered. Engage RPG rooftop. Now. The minigun spun up with a hungry whine, then roared. Tracer lines stitched across the space between them and the rooftop gunner, walking in tight arcs. The RPG streaked past the helicopter's nose, close enough that Ava felt the aircraft shudder in its slipstream, but it flew wild, arcing off into the night to explode harmlessly against some distant wall. On the flyer, the RPG team vanished in a storm of impacts. When the dust cleared, the tube lay on the roof, alone. Target neutralized, Danner reported hoarsely. For a heartbeat, there was only the pounding of rotors and the echo of the gun in her bones. Then Ops came back, ice over static. Viking 2-1, Ops. Confirm you just conducted direct fires inside the designated no-fire zone. Mercer started to answer, but Ava cut across him. Ops, this is Lieutenant CMDR Liang, she said. I ordered the engagement to prevent imminent destruction of aircraft and personnel. Event is recorded on your logs. I'll take full responsibility and provide statement upon RTB. Silence, the kind that meant recorders spinning, pens poised. Copy, ground, Ops said finally. Continue RTB as planned. We'll debrief upon landing. Mercer's shoulders slumped a fraction. You just bought yourself a world of pain, ma'am, he muttered on the intercom. I'm aware, she said. She looked around the cabin. The hostages clung to their seats, knuckles white. Harris met her eyes, something like understanding there. Danner stared out the door, scanning for new threats, but the set of his jaw had shifted, from hungry to protective. Outside, the city receded, the school and its invisible circle shrinking into a patch of darkness among many. The gunpowder stink of cordite still hung in the cabin. Under it, Ava smelled sweat, fear, and the faint relief of people who didn't yet realize the cost of what had just kept them breathing. She settled back against the bulkhead, headset pressing into her temples, and exhaled once, slow. The gunfight for tonight was over. The next battle, of words, reports, and carefully edited timelines, was already waiting for her on the ground. By the time they made it back to the briefing room, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving a dense, metallic fatigue in its place. The same fluorescent lights buzzed, the same maps hung on the walls. But the room felt smaller now, crowded with invisible things. What they had done, what they hadn't, what they were about to say. A mission timeline had been scrawled on the whiteboard in thick marker. H-hour, infill, actions on the objective, exfil. Someone had left a space open near the end, like a blank waiting for a verdict. Ava sat halfway down the table, helmet on the floor by her boots, notebook open but empty in front of her. Harris sat to her left, shoulders square but eyes red. Mercer and his co-pilot were opposite, flight suits still streaked with grime, helmets cradled in their laps. Danner leaned against the back wall, arms folded, gaze fixed on some middle distance. The colonel stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, coffee cup in hand. He didn't look as tired as everyone else, but there was a tightness around his mouth that hadn't been there before. Beside him, Kessler hovered with a legal pad, pen ready. All right, the colonel said. Let's get this done while it's fresh. This is a hot wash, not a court-martial. We're looking for lessons learned, not scalps. No one laughed. He tapped the left side of the board. Infill. Viking 2-1. You deviated from the briefed route. Explain. Mercer shot a quick glance at Ava, then cleared his throat. Sir, on ingress we observed an unlit convoy moving along the main east-west artery on our planned route. Pattern of movement suggested organized forces, unknown affiliation. With ground's recommendation, we shifted to a residential corridor to avoid being silhouetted above them. The colonel nodded, expression controlled. And this deviation compromised the mission in any way? Negative, sir, Ava said. We reached LZ Bravo undetected. The alternate ingress likely reduced our exposure to a prepared element. Kessler's pen scratched. Noted, he murmured. Good, the colonel said. That will go in as a positive adjustment. Shows initiative at the tactical level. He moved his finger along the timeline. Ground infill, target building. Harris took that one, voice steady as he outlined the route. The alley patrol they'd bypassed. The risky courtyard they'd crossed for speed. He described the decoy room, the cameras, the hidden hatch. So the intel picture on hostage location was incomplete, the colonel summarized. Not just incomplete, Ava said. Deceptive. Someone staged that second floor to look like an end state. They expected a short raid that stopped where the slides stopped. Kessler shifted. We assessed hostages on second floor based on the best available. I'm not arguing the past, Captain, she said, cutting him off before the edge in her voice got too sharp. I'm saying the enemy knew enough about our methods to stage a false positive. That belongs in your pattern of life book. The colonel held up a hand. We'll capture that. Moving on. Basement clearance. They walked through it. The door, the guards, the hostages, the smell of too many bodies and too little air. Ava kept her description clinical, but bits of memory slipped through. One hostage's raw-throated sobbing, the way Harris's hand had trembled for half a second on a shoulder before he'd steadied. And then your main stairwell was compromised, the colonel said. You chose to breach laterally. Yes, sir, Ava confirmed. We detected enemy movement stacking on the original stair. Fighting up into them with hostages in tow would have been suicidal. The wall we broke led into an adjacent structure with a separate stair. Risky, the colonel said. Less risky than the alternative, she replied. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Point taken. That will go in as well. Flexibility in maneuver. His finger slid to the last open space on the board. Rooftop, Bravo 1, exfil. Now, he said, voice tightening. We come to the part that's getting attention up the chain. The engagement inside the no-fire bubble. The room's air thickened. Pens stilled. Chairs creaked as people shifted. The ROE, the colonel continued, was explicit. No direct fires within 300 meters of the school compound, except in self-defense under imminent threat. We have gun camera and flight data. We also have audio of ops advising negative fires immediately before engagement. He looked at Ava. Lieutenant Commander Liang, walk us through your decision. This was the place, she knew. The fork where the story could snap into something simple, or remain as complicated as the moment had been. Sir, she said, we were taking small arms fire from multiple rooftops during boarding. Once airborne, we identified an RPG team setting up on a rooftop along our immediate flight path. Their firing posture and alignment indicated they were tracking us. When the RPG launch signature appeared on FLIR, we had less than a second to act. If we had not engaged, the most likely outcome was catastrophic loss of aircraft and all souls on board. You ordered the door gunner to fire, the colonel said. Not a question. Yes, sir, she replied. I explicitly stated over the net that I was assuming responsibility and breaking ROE to engage the RPG position. The colonel sipped his coffee, then set the cup down deliberately. For the record, the ROE does contain a self-defense clause for imminent threat to life. You chose to override the no-fire designation on that basis. Correct, sir, she said. I judged the RPG launch to constitute imminent threat. The school's no-fire status did not change the physics of a rocket-propelled grenade. Kessler's pen started moving again, then hesitated as the colonel lifted a hand. On that note, the colonel said, we're going to pause the general hot wash. He glanced at the far corner of the room. Recorder off. A staff sergeant at the table clicked a small device. The red light winked out. From this point, the colonel went on, discussion of the rooftop engagement will be classified and handled in a separate channel. For the purposes of this hot wash and the standard mission summary, we will state, exfil executed under sporadic enemy fire. Aircraft and personnel returned safely. No collateral damage observed. The specifics of ROE interpretation will be captured in a restricted annex. Ava frowned. Sir, with respect, that phrasing omits the nature of the threat and our response. Anyone reading the unclassified version will think we just got lucky. Or, Kessler offered weakly, they'll assume we operated within ROE as written. Which we did and didn't, Ava said. We bent one provision to honor another. That contradiction matters. It's where the lessons actually live. The colonel's gaze hardened. Lieutenant Commander, I understand your desire for precision, but hire is already skittish. The school, the no-fire zone. There are people looking for narratives of overreach. We are not handing them ammunition wrapped in our own words. So we lie by omission, she said quietly. We classify by prudence, he replied. Anyone with a genuine need to know will see the annex. Everyone else will see a mission that met its objectives with minimal noise. Sometimes, that's how you keep being allowed to go back out. The room was very still. Ava looked down at her empty notebook. The truth of that rooftop, the RPG, the split-second call, the gun's roar, was already being moved into a smaller, darker box, accessible only to people who might never smell JP-8 on their clothes. She thought of the hostages huddled now in the field hospital, alive because of a decision that would officially be described as sporadic enemy fire. Understood, sir, she said at last. The colonel nodded, tension easing a fraction. Good. We'll convene a separate session for formal statements on the engagement. For now, I need your signatures on the standard summary. He slid a clipboard down the table. The top page bore neat typed lines. Mission objectives, achieved, friendly casualties, 0 KIA, 2 WIA, enemy contact, light to moderate, collateral damage, assessed minimal. There was a line for her name at the bottom. Ava read it twice. The words weren't false exactly. They were just narrow. She signed. Harris added his name. Mercer took the board last. He read longer than the others, eyes flicking to the blank space where anything about a near fireball and a broken ROE might have been. When he signed and pushed the clipboard back, he didn't look at the colonel. He looked at Ava, the question in his gaze louder than anything he'd said in the room. Is that really how we're going to tell it? She held his eyes for a moment, then looked away. The colonel clapped his hands once, brisk. All right, hot wash complete. Get food, get sleep. Some of you will be tapped for follow-on statements. You'll be contacted. Chairs scraped. People stood, stretching stiff limbs. The room's tightness eased a little as bodies moved toward the door. As Ava bent to pick up her helmet, she caught the faint squeak of the recorder clicking on again, ready to capture some cleaner, simpler briefing another time. The real story of the night, the one stitched from basement air and rotor wash, and a brief, deadly streak of unauthorized tracer, lived only in the people walking out of the room. On paper, it was already becoming something else. The field hospital tent always smelled the same, no matter the country. Antiseptic, plastic, and the faint copper ghost of blood that never quite left. Ava pushed the flap aside and stepped in, blinking as her eyes adjusted from desert glare to fluorescent white. Rows of cots lined the interior, some occupied, some stripped. IV bags hung from metal poles, clear tubes looping like vines. Monitors beeped in soft, asynchronous patterns. It was cooler in here than outside, but not by much. The air conditioning fought a losing war against canvas and sun. A nurse in scrubs and a faded deployment patch glanced up. "Ma'am?" "I'm here to see the wounded from last night's mission," Ava said quietly. "And the hostages we brought in, if they're still on the ward." The nurse's expression smoothed into the practiced neutrality of someone who'd seen too many ranks and too many messes. "Yes, ma'am. One operator, one aircrew superficial, and your civilians. Operators are down that row, end of the line. Hostages in the second bay. Keep it low. Some of them are sedated." "Understood," Ava said. She moved between cots, eyes flicking over labels and faces. Out of the corner of her vision, she caught a stack of laminated cards on a small table near the entrance. ROE quick reference guides, the same wording she'd memorized before the mission. De-escalation, minimum necessary force, no fires near designated protected sites. One pamphlet lay open, a photo of a smiling local child beside bullet points about fire discipline. Discipline. At the far end, she found the wounded SEAL. Corman's handwriting on the clipboard identified him as Petty Officer First Class Reyes. His leg was elevated, bandaged thick from an ugly bullet track that had gone clean through soft tissue and nothing vital. Good luck, bad aim. He was awake, eyes half-lidded, an IV line feeding clear fluid into his arm. "Petty Officer," Ava said softly, stepping into his peripheral vision. "How's the leg feel?" "Like it lost an argument with a brick," Reyes muttered. His gaze sharpened on her face. "Ma'am." She pulled a folding chair up beside the cot. "You'll be complaining about running again in a few weeks." "Skipper already told me I'm benched for the rest of this trip," he said. "I told him I'd hop. He said that's not a real TTP." The joke was strained, but it was there. Ava let the corner of her mouth tilt. "He's right. Our doctrine's bad enough without adding tactical hopping." Reyes sobered. "Heard about the roof," he said. "The shot you called." Of course, word had reached even here. "You heard we all landed back here in one piece," she said. "That's enough." He studied her, eyes heavy but intent. "I also heard the bird shook like crazy when something went past the nose. Close. Felt like close." "It was close," she admitted. He nodded once, like that settled something. "Then I'm glad you did whatever you did, ma'am." She didn't answer. She rested a hand lightly on the rail instead, feeling the slight tremor of his breathing travel through metal. Voices drifted from the far side of the tent, near the small office space where admin staff worked. She hadn't meant to listen, but sound carried too well in canvas. "I'm telling you, she almost blew the ROE apart," a male voice said, pitched low but not low enough. "If that round had hit anything near the school, we'd be reading about it in every briefing for the next 5 years." "Yeah, but it didn't," a second voice replied. "They got everyone out." "That's not the point," the first insisted. "Fire discipline exists for a reason. Ops said she went guns free inside the bubble after being told negative, That's not just aggressive, that's a muttered word Ava didn't quite catch. Reckless, maybe. Or worse. She's nest dockers, the second voice said. They're wired different. A chair scraped, papers rustled. You watch, the first voice continued. Someone up top is going to make an example. Can't have officers thinking ROE is just a suggestion. Ava kept her eyes on Reyes. His gaze had shifted past her now, toward the sound. You want me to tell them to shut up, ma'am? He asked, voice rough. I can shout real loud. Won't even tear stitches, probably. She pictured it. A wounded operator calling out support staff in a medical tent. The scene would travel even faster than the rumor. No, she said. You focus on not ripping that leg open again. That's an order. He frowned. They're talking like you screwed up. You didn't. Her fingers curled against the cot rail, then relaxed. People talk. They fill gaps in what they know with the stories that feel safest to them. She lost fire discipline, is safer than our rules, and our reality collided, and we got lucky. That's not right, he muttered. Doesn't have to be right to be loud, she said. She stood. Rest, Reyes. You did your job. That's more than enough today. He watched her go, jaw tight. Ava crossed to the next bay. The hostages lay on cots behind a partition, IVs in arms, blankets pulled high. A woman in her 40s startled when she approached, then sagged when she recognized the uniform. You were there, the woman said. Her voice shook. In the basement. Yes, Ava said. You broke the wall. The woman's hands twisted in the blanket. We heard the shooting. We thought that was it. And then you were there. We were late, Ava said quietly. But not too late. Tears gathered in the woman's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how to say it. We heard something hit above us when we were on the roof. Something big. And then the helicopter. Ava shook her head once. Rest. The details can wait. She stayed with the hostages a few minutes more, speaking little, letting her presence be enough. When she finally stepped back out into the hard daylight, her eyes took a moment to adjust. Near the tent entrance, 2 officers she didn't recognize stood by the ROE pamphlet table, still talking. They fell silent when they saw her, expressions flicking through awkwardness to practiced professionalism. Ma'am, one said, nodding. Captain, she replied, moving past without slowing. She didn't ask what they'd been saying. She didn't correct them. Every explanation she might offer sounded like self-defense, and she'd spent too long making calls in the dark to start explaining them to people who'd only ever see the red circles on a map. On the way back toward the flight line, she nearly collided with Mercer. He was coming from the opposite direction, helmet dangling from one hand, expression tight. Ma'am, he said. Warrant, she answered. He hesitated. I heard some chatter in there, he said, jerking his head toward the hospital. About last night, about you. I heard it too, she said. It'll settle into whatever shape it wants. Doesn't have to, he said. There was something new in his eyes now. Anger, but not at her. My crew was on that ramp. We saw what was coming at us. I'm not going to sit quiet while people who weren't there rewrite it. She studied him. Be careful where you spend your energy, Warrant. Gossip fights are noisy and rarely decisive. Maybe, he said. But so are rockets. And you didn't let one of those decide for you. He stepped around her, heading toward the line of helicopters, shoulders squared. Ava watched him go for a moment, then turned back toward the TOC. She had no intention of chasing rumors. She had statements to give, reports to read, and another tasking board already beginning to fill. Let others choose which story to believe. She knew which one she'd keep. The interview room was cold in a way the desert never managed. Ava sat on a metal chair at a metal table, hands folded loosely in front of her. The walls were bare plywood painted institutional beige, no windows, one closed door. A single fluorescent strip hummed overhead, making the air feel thin. On the table, a small digital recorder sat on a folder stamped with classification markings. A legal officer in army green had placed both there with the same careful motion, as if arranging tools before a procedure. Opposite Ava sat a major from some investigative branch. Badges on his chest. No, dust on his boots. Beside him, the legal officer, a captain, flipped through pages without looking up. Lieutenant Liang, the major said, pressing a button. The recorder's red light blinked on. This is a formal administrative interview regarding events that occurred during your recent operation in the vicinity of Grid 214-6867. You understand you're being interviewed as a subject, not a witness? Yes, sir, Ava said. Her voice sounded flat even to her own ears. You have been advised of your rights, and you have elected to proceed without personal counsel present, with the trial counsel here as legal advisor to the command. He continued. Is that correct? Correct, she said. The captain looked up just long enough to add, You may pause at any time to consult with me on procedural matters, Lieutenant Commander, but I'm not your lawyer. Understood, Ava replied. The major clicked his pen once. All right, let's start with the basics. You were designated Ground Force Commander for the mission codename Night Glass. Your responsibilities included command of the SEAL platoon and coordination with air assets, specifically MH-60M call sign Viking 2-1. True? Yes, sir. At approximately 0205 local during exfil, Viking 2-1 engaged a rooftop position within 300 meters of a designated school compound. Our ROE card for that night explicitly prohibited direct fires in that radius absent higher authorization. True? Yes, sir, she said. The card also included a self-defense clause for imminent threat to life. We'll get there, he said. First, I want to be clear on sequence. Walk me through, slowly, what you saw and what you did in the 30 seconds before that engagement. She did. She described the rising fire, the scramble onto the helicopter, the city dropping away, the noise of rotors and rounds. She described the FLIR image, the braced figure, the tube on the shoulder, the telltale flare. She kept her words precise, stripped of embroidery. The major listened, tapping his pen against the folder. The captain's pen traced short notes. And at that moment, the major said, Did you believe you had authorization from higher to fire on that position? No, sir, Ava replied. Ops had just reiterated negative fires within the no-fire bubble. So you knowingly ordered an engagement that you knew contradicts the ROE as stated. I knowingly ordered an engagement that I believed was required by the self-defense clause, she said. The aircraft and everyone aboard were seconds from an RPG impact. I judged that as imminent threat to life. The captain cleared his throat softly. For the record, he said, the self-defense clause does allow for immediate action when forces are under imminent threat, regardless of no-fire designations, provided the response is proportional. Thank you, counselor, the major said dryly. He looked back at Ava. Who gave the order to the door gunner? I did, she said. The pen stopped tapping. Please be specific. I told the gunner he had guns free on that RPG rooftop and ordered him to engage, she said. I stated over the net that I was assuming responsibility and breaking ROE. And the aircraft commander, Chief Warrant Officer Mercer, Did he object? Did he concur? He questioned the ROE implications, she said. He expressed concern about the no-fire zone. The timeline from identification to launch gave us less than a second to decide. I made the call and took it off his shoulders. Did he have the ability to override you? She thought of Mercer's hands on the controls, of the weight of the aircraft under him. He had the ultimate authority over his aircraft, she said. He could have refused to comply. He did not. The Major nodded slowly, jotting something down. So responsibility is shared. Ava felt the fork in front of her, sharp as a blade. Shared responsibility meant shared risk. It also meant the next flight lead might think twice about trusting her judgment if this turned ugly. No, sir, she said. Responsibility for ordering the engagement lies with me. I declared that on the net. The gunner and pilot were executing under my directive as ground force commander reacting to an imminent threat. The captain's head tipped a fraction, as if considering an objection, then settled back. You understand, the Major said, that higher is under pressure on this. The school, the no-fire designation, it's sensitive terrain. There are people looking at this who won't care about FLYAR signatures and reaction time. They'll care that rounds came off a U.S. aircraft in a place that was supposed to be quiet. I understand, sir, Ava answered. So let me ask you this, he continued, leaning back. If you had it to do over again, would you wait? Would you hold fire and stay inside the ROE as written? The correct answer for someone hoping to smooth things over was obvious. I would seek alternative maneuvers. I would trust in evasive action. She saw the RPG again in her mind, a bright line intersecting their path. No, sir, she said. I would make the same call. One aircraft full of friendly forces and rescued hostages against a rooftop team with a clear shot is not a close call in my book. The ROE was not written to ask us to die to keep paperwork clean. The captain's pen stopped. The Major looked at her for a long moment, something like frustration and reluctant respect battling behind his eyes. You realize that answer will not comfort everyone reading this transcript, he said. Comfort wasn't the mission last night, she replied. Survival was. He exhaled, then glanced at the recorder. For the record, do you accept full responsibility for the decision to engage? And do you release your air crew and gunners from culpability for that call? Yes, sir, Ava said. She felt the words settle like weight across her shoulders, heavy but familiar. I do. There it was. The chain clicked closed. Dread pricked at the back of her neck, a cold line of potential futures. Reprimand, career stalled, doors closing quietly in hallways she'd never see. Behind that, under it, something else unwound. A small, fierce relief. Mercer, Danner, the crew, the platoon, their paths might stay cleaner than hers. Very well, the Major said. He clicked the recorder off. The red light died. The room seemed to exhale. Lieutenant Commander, the captain said, softer now. You may be asked to provide additional written clarification. For now, that will suffice. Ava stood, chair legs scraping the floor. Understood. The Major gathered his papers. You'll be informed of any administrative actions, he said. Until then, you remain in command of your element unless told otherwise. She nodded and opened the door. Outside, the hallway was narrow, lined with a few mismatched chairs. Mercer sat in one of them, helmet at his feet, hands clasped together. He looked up when she stepped out, eyes searching her face. All yours, she said. He rose. They asked who gave the order? Yes, she said. His jaw tightened. What did you tell them? That it was mine, she said. Because it was. For a second, anger flashed across his features. Not at her, she realized, but at the fact that she'd stepped into the line so completely. You trying to protect us, ma'am? He asked quietly. I'm trying to tell a simple story they can't twist into 16 different shapes, she said. One decision, one owner. It's cleaner that way. He watched her, something hardening into resolve. Maybe I don't want it that clean, he said. Before she could answer, the legal captain opened the door again. Chief Warrant Officer Mercer? He picked up his helmet. That's me. As he stepped past her into the cold room, Ava felt the shift. Subtle, but there. She had tried to take the whole hit. Whether he let her was now his decision. The office window rattled every time a helicopter passed. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Mercer stared out through the dusty glass at the flight line, watching another MH-60 lift off in a swirl of sand and exhaust. Rotors blurred into a disk. Then the aircraft peeled away toward the dark smudge of the city. His helmet sat on the desk in front of him, chin strap dangling, a faint scuff along the visor where shrapnel or debris had kissed it last night. Beside it lay a thin packet of paper, preliminary flight data recorder summaries, a couple of stills from the gun camera feed, and the typed version of his earlier interview answers. The words looked bland on the page. Ingress route, minor deviation, sporadic enemy fire. Nothing about the moment when an RPG trail had nearly filled his whole world. The door opened with a soft squeak. Lieutenant Colonel Harwood, battalion commander, flight wings on his chest that had seen more years than Mercer's, stepped in, closing it behind him. He carried another folder, thicker, marked with classification bands. Evening, Hawk, Harwood said. He nodded at the helmet. You and that thing had an exciting night. Mercer stood automatically. Sir. Sit, Harwood said, waving him down as he took the chair on the other side of the desk. He set the folder down, flipped it open. I just got out of a call with Hire. They're chewing on what happened over that school grid. Mercer swallowed. Yes, sir. Harwood slid one page around so Mercer could see it. It was a transcript excerpt, Ava's voice, crisp even in text. I ordered the engagement. I am assuming responsibility and breaking ROE. She took that hit clean, Harwood said. Didn't flinch. Mercer's jaw tightened. That's not the whole story, sir. I know, Harwood said. And I know you've already given your initial statement. It says you identified an emerging threat on the rooftop, that ground ordered engagement, and you executed. He tapped the paper. That's enough for the lawyers to argue self-defense and proportionality if they decide to lean that way. It's also vague enough not to hang anyone if they decide to lean the other. Mercer felt the shape of what was coming before the colonel said it. So here's my advice, Harwood continued. You leave it. Don't embellish. Don't get poetic. Don't start editorializing about how close that RPG was or what might have happened if you hadn't fired. You're a warrant. Your job is to fly the aircraft and give the command what they need, not what they can use against you. He leaned back. Through the window, another helicopter taxied past, rotors windmilling lazy circles. Sir, Mercer said slowly, with respect, that's not all my job is. Harwood smiled without humor. Is this where you tell me about duty to the truth, Chief? Mercer looked down at his hands, calluses white along his knuckles. This is where I tell you I had 12 SEALs, 4 crew, and 5 civilians in my cabin last night, and every one of them is breathing because we broke that card. He heard his own voice in his head from 2 nights before, sharp and irritated across a hot ramp. Get out of my chopper. Then Ava's voice on the net, calm while his heart climbed into his throat. I am assuming responsibility and breaking ROE. She'd stepped into the line he'd been too busy flying to fully see. Ground already took ownership, Harwood said. That's her call. She's the one who climbed on the sword. No one's asking you to shove her off it. Mercer shook his head. She didn't make that call alone. I could have refused. I could have delayed. I didn't. And every time someone in a tent says she lost fire discipline, they're talking about my aircraft, like it was a prop in her mistake, instead of the thing she kept in the air. Harwood's gaze sharpened. You've been hearing things? Yes, sir. Chief, let me be clear, Harwood said. Hire wants this contained. They want a clean narrative. Heroic rescue, no collateral damage, minor questions about ROE interpretation handled at the appropriate level. You start sending up statements that read like op-eds, and you paint a target on your own chest. Promotions, assignments, it all gets harder when your name pops up on the wrong kind of slide. Mercer thought of the evals waiting in some digital queue, the schoolhouse slots, the coveted billets, things he'd wanted once. Then he thought of the RPG's exhaust plume on the flyer, the way the aircraft had lurched as it screamed past the nose. Thought of the hostages in the back, curled around their fear, and Ava sitting by the console, choosing between ink and flesh. I'm not asking to write an op-ed, sir, he said. I'm asking to add one line. Harwood raised an eyebrow. One line can change a lot. Mercer reached for the typed statement, flipping to the end. His own signature stared back at him, neat and compliant. Beneath it, blank margin. I want an addendum on record, he said. I want it to say that, in my professional judgment as the aircraft commander, the rooftop engagement was necessary to prevent probable loss of aircraft and all personnel, and that it directly contributed to the safe exfiltration of hostages and friendly forces. The colonel stared at him. That's more than one line. Mercer met his eyes. Then trim it, he said. But leave the intent. Someone up there needs to hear that it wasn't some trigger-happy stunt. It was the only thing between us and a crater. Harwood looked down at the page, then out the window. The sun was dropping, pushing long shadows across the pads. A rotor spun lazily in the distance, pre-flight checks starting for another night. You know, the colonel said quietly, I've seen careers die over less than this. I've also seen careers saved because someone kept their head down when the political wind picked up. Mercer felt the weight of that, heavy and real. If Hire decides to kill my career because I said my people almost died and didn't, that's their call, he said. I'd rather they do it while they're looking at a full picture than a scrubbed one. Silence stretched. The office hummed with fluorescent buzz and distant turbine whine. Finally, Harwood sighed. You pilots and your damn consciences. He pulled a pen from his pocket, drew a line under Mercer's signature, and wrote in a few short sentences, speaking as he went. Aircraft commander assesses engagement as necessary to prevent imminent destruction of aircraft and loss of life. Engagement judged proportional to threat observed. Recommends event be recorded as self-defense within ROE intent. He slid the page over. Read that. Mercer did. It wasn't exactly his phrasing, but the heart was there. Good enough? Harwood asked. Yes, sir, Mercer said. Harwood initialed beside the note. I'll attach this as an addendum to the record and forward it with the rest. Hire will decide what matters and what gets buried. He gave a thin, tired smile. They always do. He closed the folder. The conversation, officially, was over. As Mercer reached for his helmet, Harwood added more quietly, "For what it's worth, Chief, if someone had written something like that in my file back in Kandahar, I might have slept better some nights." Mercer paused. "Thank you, sir." Outside, as he stepped back onto the flight line, the evening wind hit his face, carrying faint traces of fuel and dust. Another helicopter lifted, its shadow stretching long. Somewhere across the base, Ava Liang would eventually be told that the case was handled. She might never see the extra lines his commander had just written, but they'd be there, pinned to her decision like a small, stubborn piece of truth. Dawn came in thin, washed-out bands over Fob al-Sara, turning the horizon the color of old paper. Ava stood in the talk, hands in the pockets of her flight jacket, looking at the new tasking board. Yesterday's mission was a block of text already sliding toward the bottom. Night glass, green tick mark beside objective achieved. A file number instead of a memory. Above it, fresh ink, night ferry. Target, a suspected weapons facilitator in another district of Al-Qadir. Different grid, same city. Same narrow windows of politics and weather and human frailty. Her name sat beside GFC again, black letters on white tape. To the right, in a different hand, Viking 2-1 was penciled in as primary lift. Someone had adjusted the ROE slide tacked to the wall. The no-fire language around schools and protected sites was unchanged, but a new line had been added beneath the self-defense clause. Commanders on scene retain inherent right and obligation to protect forces under imminent threat. It was the kind of sentence that meant everything and nothing, depending on who read it. A staff officer stepped around her, eyes on a clipboard. "Ma'am," he said absently, then moved on. No one mentioned interviews today. Yesterday she'd been told, politely, bureaucratically, that the matter was being handled at the appropriate level. No reprimand yet. No clearance either. Just a hanging ellipsis where judgment might land later. Her boots squeaked slightly on the scuffed floor as she turned away from the board. The flight line beckoned through the open door, morning air already heating up. Outside, Viking 2-1 was a familiar dark shape against the pale sky, rotors at rest, a crew chief moving under the blades with practiced ease. Mercer stood beside the nose, a folded mapboard in hand, helmet hooked to his elbow. He was talking to Danner and the co-pilot, tapping points on the plastic with a pen. As Ava approached, she heard phrases drift across the ramp. "Alternate ingress here if we see anything like that convoy again. Keep us off the main artery, and mark this alley as a no-go if we don't get a clean look at the wires." Danner glanced up, spotted her, and straightened. "Ma'am." Mercer turned. For a second his face was the guarded mask she'd first met on the ramp. Pilot and problem, nothing more. Then it shifted, something more human sliding into place. "Lieutenant Commander," he said. "Chief Warrant," she replied. He held up the mapboard. "Just walking the route, night ferry." There was more ink on it than the standard line and arrow, notes in the margins, ISR gaps, alternate roof, little questions that hadn't been there on the first map she'd ever seen him hold. She took it from him briefly, letting her eyes track the blue grease pencil line into the city. "You're coming in high over this block," she observed, "right along the edge of the industrial corridor." "Gives us cleaner terrain," he said. "Fewer random rooftops, fewer unknowns." "And more silhouetting," she countered. "If someone's waiting, they'll see you from 3 streets away. Shift 20 degrees west on ingress and run the residential band instead. Dirtier picture, more cover. If they don't know you're coming, they don't get the first shot." He smiled, quick and wry. You know, I used to hate when people messed with my neat lines. You still do, she said. Yeah, he admitted. But you've got an annoying habit of being right in ugly places. He hesitated, the humor fading, the ramp air filled with the faint tick of cooling metal, the distant whine of another unit's generator. Listen, he said. About the other night. I know what you told the investigators. I read the summary they pushed down. They make it sound like you just wandered off the reservation for fun. That's not exactly the wording, she said. It's the feeling, he replied. So, he stopped, searching for something. What I'm trying to say is, thank you for calling the shot, for taking the hit for it, for ignoring me when I told you to get off my bird. Ava looked at him, at the faint smudge still on his helmet, at the way his shoulders set when he talked about ROE now instead of shrugging it off as someone else's problem. Careful, Warrant, she said. You're in danger of sounding sentimental. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. I'll get it checked out. She handed the map board back. You don't owe me thanks, she said. We were both there. We made the call together, whether they write it that way or not. That's not what the paperwork says, he pointed out. Paperwork is for people who weren't on the roof, she said. For a moment she considered telling him about the small, precise dread that still sat at the base of her skull, waiting for some email or message to drop the other shoe. About how every new tasking now came with the question, is this the last one before they sideline me? Instead, she said nothing. That was her weight, not his. Danner cleared his throat. We're good on pre-flight, ma'am, he said. ROE cards updated, extra copies in the rack. Ava nodded. Keep the self-defense line legible, she said. You never know when someone up there will forget you're allowed to live. She stepped back, taking in the helicopter, the crew, the smear of city on the horizon. Another mission, another risk calculus, another set of decisions waiting in the dark. No ceremony, no medals being pinned. The hostages from Night Glass were already on their way out of theater, their story going wherever such stories went. News feeds, reports, private nightmares. Her name would be a line in a log, an initial on a summary, and maybe a point of friction in some headquarters she'd never see. See you at the brief, Mercer said. Try not to tell me to get off your chopper this time, she replied. He shook his head. No danger of that, ma'am. She turned away before the moment could stretch into something softer. The next pad over held another bird, another crew prepping, another map she hadn't yet marked up. Boots on concrete, rotor blades above, the smell of fuel and dust in her lungs. This was where she lived, between lines on cards and lines of fire. As she walked toward the next helicopter, a few heads turned. No one clapped. No one saluted anything but the rank on her chest. Still, she felt the weight of their eyes, quieter now, less skeptical, a fraction more aware of who was stepping onto their ramp. It wasn't applause, but for someone like Ava Liang, it was enough.